Hello, it's Scott Manley here. If you're a regular follower of me on YouTube, you've probably been wondering, where are you? You haven't posted in over a week. And yeah, many of you may also know that I was in the process of working towards a private pilot certificate. And yeah, the last 6 weeks or so have been pretty intense because I went from being unable to fly due to weather to switching instructors to getting a new instructor and to finally actually going in and passing my exam. I didn't fly solo until like the middle of March 15th. And somehow from there, I managed to progress through all the requirements, get my cross countries, and finally have an exam. But it seems that at every step, I made things harder on myself. I mean, going right back to when I started to learn to fly, when I basically was phoning around all the different flight schools, and every single instructor was like, I can't take any more students. And I only found one, and it was like a premium flight school that uses these really cool, really cool Cirrus SR20 to teach students. And this isn't a normal plane. Most students are still learning back in like the Cessna 172 or 152 even. And those are nice high wing, they sort of float around. The Cirrus is a low wing, fast, high powered, technologically complex or technologically advanced aircraft. And that has it has many great things about it. It also has a parachute, which Amy liked. And yeah, so that made things slightly harder in some ways. It did make crosswind landing slightly easier. I did also, when I went in for my written exam, I made that harder by deciding that instead of bringing in like a modern electronic flight calculator, that I was going to use a 1942, literally made in 1942 E6B. It was made for the US Army Air Forces, which gives you an idea of how old it is. And yeah, the last few months, the weather has just been killing us, right? It's been unable to fly a lot of the time. When we could fly, we were confined to the pattern because we couldn't get high enough to do anything else, couldn't get out to do cross country. So I spent a lot of time doing landings in really marginal conditions, but that was quite useful in the end. I was very concerned that I wasn't going to be able to make some of the required landing techniques right up until I actually achieved them. Like a week ago, I still hadn't completed my long cross country requirement because to actually take the exam, you're supposed to have at least 10 hours of solo time, that you need to have 5 hours of cross-country time, and the legal definition of cross-country is any flight of more than 50 nautical miles. And specifically you're supposed to do a long cross-country with, at least one airport has to be 50 miles from the point of origin, but you need at least one other landing point, and when you add up all the landing points, it has to be more than 150 miles. And this is where it got difficult because I had only flown to a certain set of airfields with my previous instructor, and my new instructor didn't like any of them, right? And the ones he did like were all too close to be counted as cross-country. And though there were a couple out there that were great airfields, but I had only ever gone to at night. So he eventually caved and let me fly up to Ukiah and back, and I did that, and it was a great trip. Weather conditions were not great. I was originally flying at 6,500 feet to avoid turbulence, and then as I got up, I could see there was a cloud layer that was going to force me to descend below it. It was still quite high. Got in, the weather radio wasn't working. And there were a couple of people on the runway. I was able to ask them for what the wind advisories were. They were basically saying, yeah, it's mostly down the runway, but it's pretty gusty. So I gave it a go and couldn't get it down in the first attempt, went around and managed to get it down. And as I'm coming down, I see that right at the start of the runway, it's like dead air. And as I get further down the runway, you get this big headwind. So I'm literally, the nose is popping up again and it wants to take off as I'm getting halfway down the runway. Got there, came back, and then NOS, I get the weather, and the weather is fine. It actually says winds variable, and that's fine. Winds variable like 6 knots. I can handle that because when you get approved, when you get endorsed to fly out on your own, you have to get endorsed for specific flights, and the instructor will include limitations. You'll include what are called minimums, basically saying you can't fly if the clouds are too low, if the winds are too fast, if the winds are too much across the runway. And I was specifically endorsed to allow 8-knot crosswinds. And that's fine. Wind's variable, 6 knots, can't possibly be an 8-knot crosswind. I come around and I land and it's just, whoa, get on that center line, get it down, roll off the runway. And I'm thinking that it was no way that was a 6-knot wind. So I turn on the radio and it tells me it was like a 12-knot crosswind. I'm like, okay, yeah, like the things had changed just in the time that it had taken for me to join the pattern and land. You make your plans based on the radio as you're coming in. Sometimes things change, and at Novato, you can actually find that the winds are one direction at one end of the runway and the opposite direction at the other. That's why there's 2 windsocks. There's this big mountain next to it. The winds tend to blow around it and swirl around, and things can be really wild. So I got in that requirement, and then I had to do a long cross-country requirement. And so we couldn't get to Ukiah because the clouds were coming in. We saw the forecast, it wasn't going to work. I had really wanted to guarantee that I could make this check ride date. And so, a week ago on Friday, we decided, okay, we can risk going to a new airfield. Scott, you're pretty good at this. You've proven to be safe. So he endorsed me to go to Modesto, which I had some experience flying near, and it was pretty easy pattern and all that. It was a towered field. And so I take off on my own on this, and literally as I'm pre-flighting, this low band of clouds rolls over. And I'm thinking, I'm not going to be able to fly through that. So I sort of sit around waiting for them to go out of sight. And eventually I see that I can see Mount Diablo, which is on the other side of the bay. And I think that's a good sign. I will be able to get out to Mount Diablo, and that shows that I can make it through this band of clouds, right? It's dissipated by now. Get up, and I'm flying over there, and it's very clear that these clouds are still there, and I need to figure out what to do. So I sort of stop for a while at another airfield, do some landings, and then get back up, get out to Rio Vista, and I spend a bit of time there, and finally I set off and get down to Modesto. Able to climb up, 6,500 feet, or 5,500 feet above the clouds, chill out, land there, and make a fine landing, roll back, and get out of there and get flight flying backwards at altitude. And again, as I'm coming back, I begin to see, these clouds are getting pretty low, so I descend about below them. And it turns out that they weren't constrained. They weren't a problem because there were 3,500 feet. I was told that was within what I was endorsed for. But I had to sort of hang out below them, and there was a lot of people hanging out below them. I was on with Travis Air Force Base because they handle traffic in the vicinity, and they were vectoring me around, warning me about other aircraft. But eventually, I made it through out the other side and landed back at Nos, and I managed to complete all my hours required for cross country. So I was very happy. So anyway, with that, it now comes to the actual check ride. So the way this works is you sign up with an examiner or whatever, they're in town. This is a person called Karen Kalishek. She's a very well-respected person. She's actually, I think at one point, or maybe still is, chair of the National Association of Flight Instructors, and kept on reminding me that you don't need to be an instructor to be a member, and if you are a member, you get a discount on 4 flights. So I'll tell her, she'll be happy that I said that. She was really wonderful individual. She comes from Wisconsin, that's where she usually is, but she flies out here to help because there's a big demand for pilots and there's just simply not enough examiners. Now, she's what's called a designated pilot examiner. She doesn't work for the FAA, but the FAA basically will check her out. They'll send a examiner for her to make sure that she is able to then fairly examine potential pilots. And so she's out here doing that. Now, a few days beforehand, she basically sends out the plans, and part of the exam is there's an oral section where you basically talk about how much you know about flying, show that you are competent to plan flights, show that you understand how aircraft works. And guess what? I'm pretty good at that stuff. That was not something I had any concern about. She actually had me plan this trip up from Novato to Ukiah over to Red Bluff and back, and there was some night flight involved, and I felt very, very good about myself by pointing out, well, Based on the phase of the moon, we're going to have really good illumination, and you know, if we wait for the moon to line up with Mount Tam, that will be perfect for making this turn home. We can do this. Yeah, never actually got to that part in the exam because the first 2 legs of my trip were apparently well enough planned. Yeah, so we got through that. Now, the weather, as I said, had been pretty bad in California, and it actually broke about the 1st of April, and we were all looking nice. It was looking great. We could see nothing on the calendar. I was so excited. We were going to get perfect weather. And then 2 days before the exam, we suddenly see the band of clouds coming through. And literally on the morning of the exam, we have this band of clouds, rain, precipitation, low ceilings, just for the morning when I'm supposed to be doing my check ride. It's like weather comes in just for that. It was clear in the afternoon, it was clear the night before, but that morning, no, you're not flying. And that's a big problem because I was able to do the oral part, and from that point, what you get is a discontinuance. It says, we've done the exam, you are competent, we are ready to fly, we can't fly right now, you have 60 days to finish this. And so when's she coming back? June. End of May, June. We're like, oh, that's cutting it a bit close, because if you take the ride, if you actually do the practical part and you make a mistake, you get a disapproval, you're supposed to go back with a flight instructor and they're supposed to show you what you messed up, and then you have another chance to go and just show that you can do that one thing that you messed up. So I didn't want to have like a very limited window to complete this, so we figured out our schedule. She had some other students the next day, and they were going to be at an airfield like 100 miles away. So we crack this plan, we get the students to move around a bit in their timing, make a little bit of room in the schedule, and I'm going to fly out there first thing in the morning and meet her. And the thing is, yeah, you talk about how making exams difficult for myself. Well, not only am I in a high power plane that is complex, technologically complex, very fast, very performant, I'm now going to be taking my check ride practical exam at an airfield I've never been to before, in an area of the country that I've spent no time flying. And this airfield is actually sandwiched, like to the north, there is Beale Air Force Base. To the south, there is the Sacramento Class C airspace. There's limited airspace on both sides. It's only a few miles wide between them. And I don't really know this runway. So we get out there. I want to do a little bit of practice in the pattern. So we want to make sure that I can learn to land it. And I tell you, at this airfield, it seems that not all the pilots really follow the rules quite as rigidly as I do. At one point, while I was flying along the downwind is like parallel to the runway in the opposite direction of what you're going to land at. So I'm 1,000 feet above the ground, and somebody, for some reason, is flying the opposite direction in the same pattern, 500 feet above me, which is kind of close. But I still made that landing just fine. But I was like, I think I'm descend a little to give them a bit more buffer room, because I don't trust someone that is that unaware. Anyway, look, we made the landing. I got in, we spent a bit of time, had lunch, met the examiner, and of course for this one we needed another cross-country scenario. This time she had told me to plan to a place called Ocean Ridge, which is on the coast. It's actually near Gualala, a town which I know pretty well. I used to vacation there occasionally, and that's actually close to where I got married. So I actually know there was like an alternate airfield nearby, but these airfields they're short runways, like 2,500 feet is pretty close. I think it's at the minimum that is allowed in the pilot operating handbook for the Cirrus. Narrower runways than I'd ever seen before. But it didn't matter, because actually we're not going there, right? This is part of the ruse. You're supposed to plan it, show that you can do it, and then they will take you somewhere else, because they don't want you actually flying all that distance. Also, by the way, Ocean Ridge is closed right now because Pacific Gas and Electric have taken over the airfield and used it as a staging area for all the repairs along the California coast from the storms. So this is my map that I've been using for my plans. So you can see like red lines on it and everything. You can see this is where the airfield is, and you can see up north there is Beale Air Force Base. South we've got Sacramento Class C, and I'm going to be traveling out to the east. Out to the west, right? And on top of that, like, I prepared a knee board with a bunch of cheat sheet, like a flight plan with all my timings, where I'm gonna be at what time, what vectors I need to fly, what VOR settings, what frequencies, and also a cheat sheet of frequencies and altitudes and runway configurations for all the airfields I might be at nearby. So yeah, we go through pre-flight the aircraft. I show that I know all about it, tell some jokes, and let me tell you, Karen, she really is a very conversational individual. Very easy to talk to. And of course, that's part of the way you do flight check rides. A lot of the time if you want to really see that someone is devoted to making sure the aircraft is safe, you want to distract them and make sure and see that they remain on mission. And so I was very careful all the time. And of course, I was telling my little stories. It's like, yeah, see that air vent? That was designed by, was developed by NACA. That's the National, National Aeronautics Advisory Council. National Advisory Council on Aeronautics, the precursor to NASA. I was like, look at this cuffed wing. I love it. And these, the stall strips in the front. Yeah, I'm talking about all this stuff. Take off, get set up, and I roll out, I make my calls, and then I roll onto the runway, and at that point I realize, one of the things you're supposed to do in a Cirrus, because it has a parachute, they really encourage you to make a pre-flight briefing to explain how the cap system works. Right, so there's a pre-flight briefing, which is like fasten your seatbelts and all that, but before any takeoff, you're supposed to tell them that, by the way, if we lose power on the runway, we get off the runway. If we get airborne and we lose power before 500 feet, you are supposed to land straight ahead because the parachute won't get you down safely at that altitude. Once above 500 feet, if you have an engine problem, you have to pull the parachute right away so that you have enough buffer to get down safely. And finally, above 2,000 feet, yeah, you can take your time, diagnose the problem, and then make sure you're in a safe place to deploy it, but then ideally deploy it with a couple of thousand feet to spare. Now, so I'm on the runway, I'm like, oh wait, yes, caps, roll down runway, retard power if we problem get, I'm going for it. It's just this moment of panic. I think it was a little longer, but it felt like forever. It felt forever that I was going through this. I get up, and because I'm actually supposed to go to the west, but we are on runway 15, which goes south. Now, you're not supposed to take off and immediately turn west. What you're supposed to do is make a downwind departure to the west. That's what I called out. You basically take off, you turn left on the crosswind, and then you turn left onto the downwind, and then you continue climbing, and once you get enough altitude, you can turn left again out to the west. And that's how you're supposed to, in untowered airports, that's how one way to depart the pattern that is legal. So I'm doing this, and as I'm turning on the crosswind, I see somebody coming over, like, 1,000 feet straight across the runway, parallel to me. I'm like, what's this idiot doing? He's way too low. If there was someone on downwind, he would have crashed into them. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna extend my crosswind, and so I extended, and I came out, and then I turned over the field when I was safely above this individual. So here's the thing, right? While that was totally chaotic, while I didn't quite get my briefing together, it was a safe takeoff. I handled collision avoidance. I was aware of everything going on. I made sure my instruments were in check. And the important thing is the examiner didn't say you failed, because she's supposed to tell you right away when you fail. So I'm spending the whole exam waiting to hear this, but understanding that if I haven't, I'm still good. So yeah, we get out, we continue. I start picking up my flight plan. I have like some beacons, VOR set up to make sure that I know when it's safe to turn. I'm not supposed to use GPS, although it's there in the aircraft. And once I'm on course, she's like, okay, we're gonna put on the hood, basically do some simulated instruments. So I put on this thing, it covers my eyes so I can only see the instruments in front of me. And and basically start following my vectors, and she starts giving me some things. And I show that, yeah, I can fly in a straight line and follow basic orders and hold headings and altitudes. You know, that's great. And the next thing that happens is she gets to fly, and what she does is tries to show that I can handle unusual attitudes. So basically, she said, put your eyes down, you know, go to sleep, take your hands away from the controls, and then she just flies crazy like this and says, okay, look. And so I'll come out and I'll be like 60 degrees to the horizon, nose down, and you're supposed to know, okay, pull the power back so you don't go faster, roll out, and then pitch up, and then put the power back in and get back to your original altitude. And similarly, if you're high at an angle, you know, you put the power in, you bring the nose down and roll out, right? And then you fix your altitude. Did that just fine. I mean, God, I felt like Luke Skywalker in Star Wars using the Force, because, hey, that's what I grew up with. There were actually quite a few Star Wars quotes on this trip, which is great for me. I got to then start trying to take that off and start demonstrating other things like slow flight, where you're flying the plane really slow, and then came around and had to fly the plane fast and do steep turns, where you're doing steep turns one way and then the other, and showing that you can hold the heading. Stalls, which I didn't really get the stalls down correctly at first. I was actually way too timid. I know, yeah, Scott Manley is a little timid with his stalls. Initially, I didn't do enough of a stall, and then we did it the second time with power on, and what happened was the what's called the electronic stability protection system kicked in, and it said, nope, you are not going to fly this plane like this. The autopilot basically tries to pull control away from me, and it dropped the nose. And so I went in, turned that off, and then did my power on stall, steep up, and you slow down, the wing drops, and you fix the thing and get back in control. Look, so, you know, I did that, I demonstrated. We had a simulated emergency where we pretended there was a cockpit fire, and I turned things off and did a spiraling descent, like emergency descent. And then when we were down close to the ground, we were like, okay, yeah, engine failure. So I go quickly through all my stuff, hit up my checklist, you know, simulate pulling caps, pulling the parachute. Like, I like to turn on the emergency location transmitter before I touch down, because it'll give some pings. Yeah, I didn't do that, but like, that's the kind of thing you talk about. So I guess I proved that I was able to do that. Next thing was ground reference maneuvers, where you fly down close to the ground, about 1,000 feet, pick up, in this case it was turns around a point. So you pick a point, keep the wing on it, and fly around in a circle with the wing pointed at it, maybe 3/4, half a mile from it. I think I might have been on the slightly far end of things, but you know, the turns were neat, nice and neat, and they worked. And then it really got comical. Oh boy, oh boy. So, remember what I said, we're not going all the way to Ocean Ridge, so there is a diversion. A diversion basically is, I feel sick, we need to land at a different airfield. And I didn't quite cotton on to what she had actually said was, can we go home instead? So I'm just like, oh, pilot, someone's sick, medical emergency, diversion, closest airfield, private airfield, Calusa. I've never been there before. There's this tiny little airfield. I'm not actually sure of the details, and it's like 4 miles away. So I'm going in and I'm like, oh, I better make a call. And Calusa traffic, is there anyone there? Traffic and like, I finally figure out where I'm supposed to be, what side of the runway I'm on. All during this, there's somebody that actually calls out on the radio and says, is that Scott Manley flying? And I did not respond to them because, frankly, I didn't need that on a check ride. But I didn't ghost you unintentionally. I was just really predisposed, or really busy with like not failing this. So I come around, get on the correct side of the airfield for my runway, and she's like, oh, by the way, I'm sick. You need to make this a soft field landing. Now, the thing about Calusa is that it has a 3,000-foot runway. The runway I had been using at the original airfield was 6,000 feet long. When you do a soft field landing, you really want as long a runway as possible. So I completely screwed myself by doing this. You know, and so soft field landing, the idea is you leave in a little bit of power and just gently touch those wheels. Keep the nose up And then you can take the power out, keep the nose up as long as possible, and slow down aerodynamically with minimal use of braking. And I guess, I don't know, the force must have kicked in because I succeeded against all the odds. Shorter runway, narrower runway, completely unfamiliar terrain. At that point, I think she did take pity on me and just say, yeah, we should go back to where we started. So I did a soft field from there, headed back home, again, did the proper pattern entry, and once again, there was some crazy people doing wild things there. And this time she says, can you make a short field landing? So short field is a precision landing to show that if you've got a short runway, you can come down right at the end of the runway and hit the brakes as quickly as possible. So I do this, I set up, I call my point, and as I'm coming down and I'm rounding out and I'm flaring, I'm like, I think I might go a little long here. So I just put the power in and fly around again. And what she said was, that was a really good short field landing right until you put the power in. Having said that, you are required to demonstrate how to perform a go-around during a private pilot exam, right? Because you're supposed to show that if the landing isn't looking right, you can fix it and escape and not crash the plane. Because, when you put in full power and you've got lots of flaps in and you're perhaps using a high angle of attack, you can have the nose can pull off to the left due to the P factor. So all these things you have to work with. You have to know how to clean up the plane, get back into the pattern and be safe. So I go around again. This time I'm going for my short field and there's somebody getting very close behind me as well. But I come in and make it. This time I get that short field landing right on the mark and stop on the runway. And I hear this person behind me is like, are you guys getting off the runway? I'm like, no, we're gonna do a short field takeoff from here. So short field takeoff is you're in the plane, you're putting your feet on the brakes and you're applying full power, letting the engine get up to speed, and only then do you release it. So we get someone bearing down behind us who clearly isn't sure what he's going to do. I've got my, I set up my plane and I just tell him, we're on the go, you can make your landing. So yeah, to make my short field, clearly get out of there. The pilot lands just fine. If he wasn't sure, he would offset, go around us. He would have to make his own collision avoidance because he's behind us. But, I didn't feel rushed. I did very neat short field. And then finally I got to do on the final turnaround, I had to perform a forward slip, and landing. And yeah, your forward slip, you could put in full rudder, keep the nose down, turn the aileron so you're slipping towards the runway. I'm doing that just fine. And at some point I pull out and round out and make my landing. And again, it's a normal landing this time, but there's still distance limits on it. And she says, wow, you almost used up all of your limits on that landing. So I hadn't really consciously thought about where this plane was going to touch down. I just wanted to make a nice landing. And I guess it was luck, that I didn't actually bust my check right on that final landing. But boy, it was an intense experience. Got off the runway, parked the plane, had to take a different route around because somebody was sitting in the middle of a taxiway still. Yeah. And yeah, packed up the plane, secured the plane, and you got congratulated. And so now I am actually a private pilot. I would love to have done this with a recording, right? You're not allowed to record these things because it is an exam, and really it's bad. You're not supposed to record exams because that might help someone unfairly. And it's a shame because it was such a wild experience, and she was really great at just talking through all the things. She's not allowed to teach. She can occasionally say things that might give me some hints, but no teaching. I kept the plane safe at all times. We occasionally had jokes. We had stories that I had to say, hold on, I am flying the plane right now. I need to concentrate on this. But if we had the recording of that, it would be sublime. There was so much that happened there and so many moments of sheer terror and moments of joy. And I'm happy I did it. I feel that I can finally, honestly, truly say, fly safe.